Hey everybody, lovely to get the opportunity to talk to you again, even though we cannot personally be together at this time. I want to do something a little different this week in breaking down what I want to talk to you about into some smaller segments. So let me know how it goes, let me know how it works for you, and we'll see what's the best way forward as we continue to negotiate ourselves through these lockdown times that we're in. So I want to talk to you about something that I've entitled Barbarians to Bureaucrats. The substance of the title will become more evident as we progress through this little journey, so don't worry about that too much at the moment, but you will see how that applies to every one of us, not just on a corporate local, national, international, governmental, business level, but also in our own personal lives and how we express what we might call our Christianity. But what I want to talk to you today in starting this is about something I think is of critical importance for every one of us, and is probably foundational to us understanding the journey of barbarians to bureaucrats. And that is this, that purpose is to the human spirit as water is to the body. In the same way that the human body cannot survive long without water, the human spirit cannot stay alive long without purpose. If you do just a cursory search of the consequence of going without water, you will mostly pull up that the suggested length of time that you and I can live without water, our bodies being without water, is about 3 days. Now that varies a little bit on environment and levels of activity, and one or two more things, but by and large, the time that you can survive, that your body can survive without water, is just 3 days. So I question then, how long can the human spirit stay alive without purpose? And if the human spirit can't stay alive long without purpose, then is that a better explanation of what we mean by the term spiritual death than perhaps we have been given in the context of it being the result of some perceived separation from a divine being? Maybe spiritual death is more to do with separation from purpose than it is this perceived separation from a divine being. Therefore, purpose becomes extremely important in the context of the inner survival, the spiritual survival of every single one of us as human beings. There are without doubt a lot of people walking around with dehydrated spirits because they no longer have a clear sense of purpose. And maybe that's you today. I think we're all familiar with this sense of we don't quite know what it is, but I would suggest to you that what that thing is that we're not quite sure what it is that we start walking around with is the feeling of a dehydrated spirit, that we no longer have a clear sense of purpose. And if we're paralleling that with the human body and its need for hydration with water, then the truth is that if we become dehydrated in spirit, inner death is the unavoidable outcome. I do find it fascinating, as I do many of these things because the way my mind works, that the resurrection story is one that has the resurrection occurring after 3 days. And, it sets me thinking that if the human body cannot survive long without water, and that length of survival is 3 days, and then you need a resurrection, then here's another wonderful indicator that resurrection is something that we need if we become dehydrated in our spirits of purpose, we need a resurrection to occur. There's the symbolic thing there that after 3 days comes we need a resurrection. Now, let me say, in the context of understanding purpose, just because we do something purposefully does not mean we live with purpose. So you can go to your job and do something purposefully. You know, you can crank out the washers on the machine or whatever it is that your job might be, or even you can do things purposefully in terms of looking after your kids, or building your home, or trying to be a father or a mother, or any of those things. You can do it very purposefully, but it doesn't mean we live life with purpose. And sometimes, having done those things, what we are left with inside and in terms of our well-being and our vision and purpose and dream and life and fulfillment are not what we would like them to be, even though we've done something purposefully. So just because we do something purposefully does not mean we live life with purpose. One can do something purposefully and yet live without purpose. Do you get that? Do you see where I'm coming with that? Now, there's a little equation that's helped me tremendously in understanding what purpose produces, and therefore how I can recognize in my life what is not the product of purpose. So I know I am fully hydrated in spirit by observing that purpose produces passion, which produces a joyful life, which produces a sense of release or fulfillment. See that first thing? Purpose produces passion, which produces a joyful life, which produces a sense of release and fulfillment. Now, opposite to that, if I observe that I am performing tasks, okay, a task is something which you perform, that produces duty, which is what you fulfill, and that leads to resentment, and that leads to judgment. So the ultimate objective measure of whether my life is hydrated with purpose is, do I finish up in the place of judgment, or do I finish up in the place of fulfillment? Do I finish up with a joyful life, or do I finish up with a resentful life? Because those are the measurements that tell me whether I am living with purpose or whether I am simply living, performing task. So purpose produces passion. Not the other way around, which is interesting. I would have said that if you're passionate, that's where you get your purpose from. But some people who by nature are bubbly and outgoing and fulfill and on the go and excited and seemingly excited and going are not necessarily full of purpose. That's part of just the way they express themselves, because passion doesn't produce purpose. Its purpose, though, will also produce passion, and sometimes that passion is quiet. It's an inner confidence. It's an inner belief, not necessarily a loud outward. We've said, passion has to be loud and vocal, but it's not always that. And sometimes that can mask the fact that a person is lacking purpose. So purpose produces passion, and that passion produces a joyful life. There's a good measure. And that produces a sense of release and a sense of fulfillment. The task is what you perform. You perform the task. The task is that which you perform. We can all do that. Duty is that which you fulfill. So task leads to duty. That which you perform leads to that which you fulfill. But when that's not purpose and passion, all that leads us to is resentment. We resent what we're doing. We resent why we're having to do it. We resent that others are not doing it. We resent that this is the situation we're in, the life that we've got, the income we have, the situation we're in, and all that stuff. And then that leads to judgment of, whose fault it is and who's to blame and why. And well, so can you see the difference? I know I'm fully hydrated when purpose produces passion, which produces joyful life, which produces release and fulfillment, rather than knowing that I am dehydrated on purpose when everything's become a task by which I fulfill it through duty that leaves me with resentment and makes the end result judgment. Now, in the Old Testament, there's a tremendous story, a book that's called the Book of Nehemiah. And I would say go and have a read of it, because I think the book of Nehemiah is a great exponent in its storytelling of what purpose will do as opposed to what task does. And Nehemiah in the story, he is a Jew, and he is an exile from home in a country that's not his own. And he took on the challenge to rebuild a broken down, deserted city that should have been his dwelling place, should have been his inheritance, should have been his heritage, but wasn't, because he was exiled from where he was supposed to be. Maybe you can relate to that feeling. Nehemiah had not even been involved in the decisions and circumstances that led to his exile and slavery and the destruction of his home. This was something he came into not because he had predetermined to be in this situation, and maybe also you feel that today, that what put you in the situation you're in was not totally due, or even at all due, to your decisions and your involvement, but you found yourself in this place that somehow has meant destruction of where you potentially, probably, and possibly ought to be. But the outworking of purpose in Nehemiah's life would all depend, listen to this, would all depend on the way he saw rubble. This is the cleverness of the story. He is going back to a place that all he can see is destruction, failure, brokenness, hopelessness. It talks about the spaces being overrun and occupied by jackals. It is kind of giving you this idea that what should be the place of his dwelling has become so wild and unoccupied that it's the jackals and the wild beasts that wander around there. These images work for me because I'm artistic creative. I hope they work for you too. And that's kind of saying this is the place that he was having to deal with. But as I said to you, the outworking of purpose in his life would all depend on the way he saw the rubble. He was going to visit a situation where what he would see would be more rubble than reality. Or maybe that's the wrong word. Maybe the rubble was the reality. And that part of seeing that what needs to exist does not exist in the form it should exist might be a good way to put it. Maybe seeing that first is that's the reality, and the reality is the rubble. But it's how you see the rubble that will determine whether you are approaching the challenge of life with purpose or whether you've now been gripped by task. So what's interesting from that story, and as you read it, you'll see what happens. We might say a little more about it in a future little talk, but it was more popular than ever. It's more popular than ever now and considered high-end to build using reclaimed material. That's just a fact of modern life. That's a posh, intelligent way of saying you took the rubble from what had collapsed, been demolished or destroyed, and use that as the material in the building of something new, a new dream, a new life. The rubble of the past becomes the material from which you build the future. If I had known that, we have all said at some time, if I had known then what I know now, I would have done things differently. But listen to me, you didn't, and you wouldn't. But now you can. We'll pick this up again in our next talk. Have a blessed day, and I look forward to catching up with you again.